Welcome everyone to another episode of Startup Grind. Thank you everyone for coming here tonight. Just an FYI, Asnan has a business cards, they give it out, and there's numbers on them, so they're going to do some kind of raffle batch way, so don't throw them out, okay? Okay, so I'll give you a brief about Startup Grind. Startup Grind is an event designed to inspire, educate, and connect entrepreneurs together. So today we're here to pick the brains of Mr. Faisal Hamad here, and he's going to help us to be inspired and educated towards entrepreneurship and various other fields. So let me give you just a brief intro to Mr. Faisal Hamad. He's the CEO of NBK Capital. I think everyone here knows that. And he's an entrepreneur by trade. So the positions he's filled, he's an entrepreneur by trade. He knows it inside out. So we'll start off with a little icebreaker. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are and what pushed you to choose the field you're in right now.
Just a disclaimer, I'm not really an entrepreneur by trade. I don't have the risk appetite or the bravery to be an entrepreneur by trade, but we do a lot with entrepreneurs. So just a disclaimer, I can give you a lot of advice as much as I can that I've learned, but from an entrepreneurship startup side, I think more people in this room have experience than I do on that level. How did I get to what I'm doing right now? It's صراحة luck, by accident sometimes, and work. And by my undergrad, in terms of what I studied undergrad, was history. So nothing to do with finance. I loved doing what I did for 4 years. I enjoyed it. I graduated. I realized I couldn't be a professor, wasn't smart enough to be a professor, and I couldn't make money doing history. I had to move into the financial sector, which was very tough for me, and not many people wanted to hire someone with a history background. ولكن alhamdulillah, I got lucky, and I took a job at a firm called Wellington Management Company, which was is a financial organization in the US, doing something which I didn't really understand, and it sort of took me step by step to different places, leading to where I am today.
That's beautiful. What is the most challenging or rewarding aspect of your work or career so far?
Learning is number one, frankly. Learning and working with people. I love working with people. I like to learn from people. I like to impact, hopefully, people in a positive way. I like seeing different things, experiencing different sectors, different challenges, just continually being in a position where your mind is working, على طول. Because I think the toughest place to be is, even if it's a great job, being bored at work. You spend most of your time at work. If you're not learning, it's quite challenging.
So building upon what you just said, that you love challenges, were there any entrepreneurial endeavors in your journey so far?
شوف صراحة I dabbled into entrepreneurial endeavors, created a couple of business plans, one in real estate, one in education, one in finance, but again, I didn't have the guts to do it. I worked in organizations and institutions where there were entrepreneurial elements, whether it's starting a new business line or starting a new office. You sort of go through that framework. But I think it's also important at a certain stage in your life to know who you are. Some people are very attracted to risk and thrive with the unknown, and some people do better in an institutional framework where there's a bit more structure but allows you to do a bit more entrepreneurial stuff. So yes, there were some entrepreneurial endeavors, but it's nothing that really went from paper to actuality, which I think is where you really test yourself.
That's amazing. Okay, so given that background and you actually went through that entrepreneurial endeavor, it couldn't have been easy to get investors to believe in your idea. So how did you secure funding to manage that planning phase?
So I didn't get to the funding phase, right? But I think we've seen from NBK Capital, from the standpoint of NBK Capital, obviously we see businesses that are looking for funding. And again, I think it's dependent on what stage the investment is in, what stage the company is in. I think from a startup point of view, in Kuwait it's very tough. صراحة, I think it's getting better, but it's very tough to find funding for startups. I think we've had good examples where startups have made money for investors at every stage and evolution of that company. And I think the more we see of those examples, the easier it will get because the ecosystem will be built. If you go to a bit later stage, which is what I understand a bit more, It really depends on the company's business plan, the business model, whether or not that company can scale, whether it's regional or global, and what their defensive posture is as a company, and most importantly, where you see the returns coming from. But overarching all of this is the management, is the people, right? You basically spend a lot of time trying to understand the people and what their character is like and how they'll be when you invest with them. Because it's not easy as a business owner or someone that starts up a company to bring in an investor from the outside, especially a financial investor who's going to put a lot of constraints on you and ask for a lot. And you've seen a lot of failures where people have invested in a good idea with a good team, but it's a bad marriage. Those are the aspects we look at mostly when we look at investing in companies.
You mentioned in the beginning something that you were a history major.
Yeah.
So you leaped into the financial sector to secure a career.
Yes.
So what do you think of people who want to leap from a secure career back to something like history or art or drama or acting? That's where their passion is. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's a great idea to do what you want to do, what you love doing. It's a cliche, follow your dreams, right? Everyone sort of hears that. But to me, it was a choice of two things. First, I didn't think I'd be in the financial sector for long. So now I am in retrospect. But it's also a function of sometimes you don't have that ability nor that luxury to do something that you love doing because you have to make a living and you have to make ends meet. There's another way, right? There's a way where you can actually work, and I think in the Kuwait we're blessed in the sense that you can work not intense hours and still do what you love on the side in some senses. I think in other fields you have to focus on it. But if it's something you want to do, you can test the waters by having that safety net and then jumping into it. But again, I'm not a risk taker. So if you ask other people, they say go for it and don't even think about it. I also think if you're going to do it, you do it earlier on in life. Because as much as you think it's not going to catch up to you, life sort of makes you a bit more, again, less risky. Because mas'uliyat and you have other things that you're looking at, the opportunity cost is higher.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so how do you maintain your strength and wits during a proverbial storm of difficulties, like during the peak at work? How do you maintain your strength and wits?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think you're only, again, cliche, but you're only as good as a team, right? Alhamdulillah, I've been in situations where the team's been there and you rely on the team and you're able to just take things step by step. So firstly, I think you have to be calm. You can't overreact, which is very hard in a tough environment or a tough situation. Secondly, I think you need to figure out what you're going to do and what you're relying on your team to do. I think if you try to do it all yourself, assuming you have a team, some businesses don't, but if you're going to do it all by yourself, it becomes very tough. You really spread yourself too thin. And I think you need perspective. كل شيء حل. يعني, as long as you have your health, everything else is less important. I think you need to take a step back at times, in a challenge, go for a walk, go for a run, go meet a friend for coffee, put yourself in perspective, and things become easier and manageable to do. So basically, break that challenge up into steps that you know you can achieve, get perspective, and make sure you have people around you that will support you in dealing with those issues.
I think those are really good advice.
I hope so.
But
The mushkila is I have people from work here, so I don't know. They're all looking the other way.
So you told us about the entrepreneurial endeavors you took and that they never actualized.
Yeah.
So it's pretty harsh to say that it might be failures, but us in the startup world, we consider failures the best lessons.
Absolutely.
So can you share with us some of those failures and how you actually learned from them?
Shuf, صراحة, I don't have, and this is one of the questions you sent me I couldn't prep for. I don't have failures that are interesting enough to share. But I have, you have a series of failures that teach you things that allow you to really be stronger in the next time around. To me, because I haven't taken that much risk from a business standpoint out of the institution, the failures are sort of small, project related, whether it's opening up an office and that office doesn't really work well, or if it's starting a different line of business and that doesn't work well. But within that environment, I don't see it as a huge failure. I have a lot of respect for people that go out, put themselves out there, build a business, put their money behind it, put their careers behind it, put their families aside, and that fails. And I agree with you 100%. I think I would rather talk to people that have failed, hopefully not the same failure over and over again, but that have failed and have come back, than someone that's just done well. I also think sometimes it's good to look back at the decisions that you said no to, right? It's not about successes, it's about things you avoided. And if we look back, I look back at businesses that we were going to invest in. Some did phenomenally well, and we're going to talk about this with one of the companies, which we missed out on, so I view that as a failure. And others didn't, which I think one needs to look at and understand that that's something that went well, and why did it go well, and how do you make sure you institutionalize that thought process.
All right, so in Serdab Lab, part of Serdab Lab is actually the mentorship program, where entrepreneurs sit with mentors and they help them through those struggles or through any advice. So can you share with us some of our mentors that really influenced your career?
Sure. Sarah, the mentors that I had professionally really came out of my 4 or 5 years when I was working abroad, and primarily because people understand what mentorship is. And I don't think in the region, I think we're getting better, but I don't think people understand the concept of true mentorship. I had two very senior partners in the firm that I was in that I approached, and mentors don't come to you, right? You sort of have to go and prove to them that you're someone that they should be spending time with. And partially it was selfish. I approached them because I wanted to apply to business school. I knew they were graduates of those business schools, and I wanted to create a relationship with them over the course of 3 years, so when I go back and ask them for a recommendation, there's something there tangible that they can write about. And for me, that was a very important aspect to have in my career, and that they taught me, they gave me advice at times in my career that was important. One thing someone said to me once was, you had, I'm blanking out on the CEO of Morgan Stanley had a chance. He was in New York, doing phenomenally well, progressing, and then he had a chance to go and run the Ohio office of Morgan Stanley. And everyone was like, with all respect to Ohio, it's not really the hub of investment banking. But he took it, and going back, he always thought of that as the inflection point in his career, because he took something no one knew about or cared about and created something from it. So he shined basically out of it. So I think it's always important to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and sometimes take the decisions that don't make full logical sense, because they tend to set you apart from the rest of the pack. So that story was for me very important, because that happened to me several times over the last 10 years, where I moved into something that I didn't necessarily think was what I was interested in, but it created value for me long term.
All right, so now we're going to...
Sorry, I have to do
Go ahead.
A plug. And my mentor, Hayati Abui.
Oh, okay.
That's a plug, and he's always been there, helping me think through issues, and I think it's important if you have that in your family, because they give very good advice.
And support, right?
Huh?
And support.
And support. But you have to create the environment where they can tell you when you're not doing well and when you are doing well. And he always tells me when I'm not doing well, so it's good.
It's constructive criticism. It's always good, yeah. All right, so we're going to go now to the business part of this interview. So everyone here is interested to know, what do investors look for when evaluating a business?
Yeah. Look, again, you want to look at a business that has the right management team, that has a product that makes sense. Sometimes we think of products, or you think of a product that you think is phenomenal, but it only addresses your issues, and it's not what the rest of the people want. So you have to have a product that actually makes sense for the market. It has to be, in my view, more and more scalable today. لأن احنا بالكويت, this marketplace is not just Kuwait anymore. We're talking about the region, we're talking about Africa, we're talking about Asia. So you have scalability. You want to have a defensive posture as a business at a certain point. And more importantly, you want, again, something that generates cash, and you can see predictability of cash flow. So when we look at valuing a business, it's all about cash flow, right? Assuming you have all these elements, it's really a discussion about how much cash can this business throw off in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so do you think there would be a difference if it's a normal business or if it's a venture, a startup?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, the stats are the stats, right? 10% of businesses make it, 90 don't. So at the end of the day, management is even more important. Business concepts is even more important, depending on what stage you are in the VC spectrum, right? If you've hit commercial viability, then it becomes, kind of a different game. But early on, you want to go to someone that really understands the field, that can add value to you as an investor. I think the worst thing you can do as an entrepreneur is to bring in dumb money. That'll just kill it. I think you need to talk to people that add value, either have done it before, understand the space, and they can understand how to value the space better, right? Because they know what's going on in the marketplace.
That's true.
They use comps, they'll look at comparables in other markets, they'll look at the market size, the market demand, and they'll haggle on valuation. At the end of the day, it's all about haggling on valuation, because you want to build that 80, 100% return that VCs look for in companies to make up for the other businesses that fail.
With regards to the variables that you guys look at to value those startups, let's say technology startups, where right now they're on the rise in Kuwait and abroad, do the variables change with regards to the valuations?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a market that's driven by liquidity. So when you have a lot of money chasing too few deals, people are going to overpay, right? And you're seeing it in the US with the unicorns. You guys have all read about them. They have this new statement now. It's 100 for 10. So no one wants to talk to anyone unless you put in $100 million for 10% of the business, which means that you're a $1 billion company. I think, again, I don't know enough about it, but my personal view is I think there's a lot of money chasing after companies. Yes, I mean, you look at it differently when you're looking at startups, when you're looking at technology. And sometimes it's best, going back to what I was saying earlier, sometimes it's best to pass. Because at the end of the day, you want to make money, but you also don't want to lose money on an investment just because everyone else is doing it at that time.
That is true. Because there's some kind of, now it's a hefty question, so just hang on. It's companies in a wide range of manufacturing and service industries are reshaping their operations to make them more agile, flexible, and responsive to changing market conditions. So that's no easy task to do. So what are the key tactics that you followed in the companies or positions you've led so far to hedge against those risks?
Sure. So I can talk about the companies we've invested in, because I think they're smarter managers. They've got you see 10, 15 opportunities. I think the most successful ones have been people that are agile, right? People that are able to adapt to business environment aspects very quickly. So part of it is today there's regulations, right? Regulations change, and SFND in this region again they change kind of erratically sometimes. So you need to be able to make sure that you're agile. You can't take a hit and then just sort of sulk on it. You have to move very quickly to adapt the business model. I think you have to incentivize people very well, especially on the VC side. Then at the end of the day, it's all about, to a large degree, it's all about the money. And you need to make sure that people know and buy into what you're doing as a business owner or as an entrepreneur. So you need to incentivize them well. I think you need to manage people well as well and give them a strategy and an understanding of where things are heading. Those are really the three main aspects. I don't know if that answers the question, Linda. It's kind of a
it actually does.
Long question.
Yeah, it somehow does, yes. Right, so as an organization gets larger, there can be a tendency for the institution to dampen the inspiration that you get from the institution. So how do you keep this from happening?
Yeah. Again, I have people that I work with. So I think it's important. I think it's important to communicate with people, right? I think it's important to tell people, especially when things are bad. And I think it's important when things are bad that you come up front and say, look, we're going through a rough patch. This is a challenge. We're going to come out of it. I really hope everyone works together to get there. So in terms of inspiration, I think you need to challenge people. You need to communicate. You need to communicate strategy. It's important that the new college grad that just joins as an analyst or an MD that you hire in know where the company is going and what they're doing day to day to help that progression to that end game, right? I think that's very rewarding for people to understand. So you have those things, and then I'm not sure. I'll ask the team when we get done. But it's primarily for me communication, and in different businesses it's also things like training and development and making sure people are sort of up to speed with what's going on, especially on the technology side. I think is also important to show you're investing in people and doing it continuously.
With regards to decision making, does that factor into that question too? If you engage your actual employees instead of just having it vertical at the top?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very good point. You need to engage with employees. Obviously, not every employee is going to be able to, you know, if he wants to go right and 90% say left, you're not going to make everyone happy. But I think it's important to make that person understand why left is not the right decision, right? So I think decision making is important. And I think, again, performance management and sort of the HR component is the nervous system of the business. You need to have a way where people can tell you what's going on. If it's not going in the wrong direction, if it's going in the wrong direction, they're not getting blocked by their manager only. They can move up the ladder and sort of communicate to the HR team and make sure they're heard.
So the main issue here is just communication, focus on that.
Absolutely.
All right, so can you explain the impact, if any, that social networking and the speed of news had on your organization or even you personally?
Yeah, I mean, we're spending more time trying to understand this question. And our business is not as dynamic as other businesses, right? So it has less of an impact on us. But a rumor in the market, a tweet can change everything.
Exactly.
And that's very dangerous. So for us, it's trying to understand how we manage the information flow. I think with time, again, with regulations, that aspect of it, the dangerous element of it, will change. But it's very clear that you can impact a bigger consumer base through social media. So when we look at consumer-driven businesses, it's one of the first things we look at is how is their social media program/strategy being delivered, if it is, and if it isn't, how we can impact that to move it forward. I think it's a critical element of any business moving forward. And again, different businesses have there's more impact to those businesses in different sectors.
With regards to the speed of news part of that question, NBK Capital definitely has a treasury department. And within the treasury department, there's always the news factor where you have to know how it's happening around the world.
Yeah.
So is it faster through those Bloomberg terminals, or is it faster through, for example, Twitter or social media with regards to that speed?
I mean, I think both. Social media, you need to validate sometimes a bit more. You can get an idea or a direction where the news is heading, but you end up trying to look for a primary source to make sure that it's correct.
Makes sense.
You use all the instruments, but it's also dangerous to just sort of rely on one tweet, especially if the source isn't very credible, because you can take a bet on something that doesn't work.
That's true. All right, so in a business, your network is very important. So it would be nice if you can just shine a light or give us some insights on how do you maintain and grow your professional network?
Yeah. I think network is extremely important. Look, different events, right? I mean, this event is one. I'm meeting new people here today. I go to my reunions, my primarily business school reunions, because I feel like you need to remove yourself from your immediate environment and meet with people who are much more intelligent than you are, who are much more driven than you are, because they push you. You have an idea of what's going on. Yani, I'll give you an example. My 5-year business school reunion, when I said I was in finance, everyone would talk about it and we'd have chats. I just did my 10-year in May. I said finance. Everyone looked at me like a dinosaur. Saraha, we were talking about artificial intelligence, technology, genomics. All these things. So going back to the network, when you keep your network active, you get a sense of where things are heading in different markets, which ultimately impact you here and gives you a business idea. So I would say, if you've got a network from university, keep in touch with them, whether it's electronically through the usual forms, Facebook, Instagram. Although Instagram كله صور إجازات بس. Do the reunions. Definitely do the reunions. Go spend time and meet people. Conferences sometimes help. And I think what you guys are doing is phenomenal, and that also helps put together people that have the same thought process, but are at different stages in their career and business.
In the startup world, recruiting someone that is a superstar employee that helps you push your business forward is actually really hard. And if you find that person, it's really hard to grasp on that person because sometimes he gets alluring offers us elsewhere. So how do you find and keep a superstar employee?
It's tough. I mean, it's tough. In this region, in this market, it's tough because there's a lot of competition. Again, it comes back to the culture that you create. I think it's not easier, but I think it's more important to have a good culture within the firm that you're in, because that makes it tougher for the person to leave, frankly. Because if I thought about where I would go work next, it'd be very tough for me to think of a place that I enjoy more than I enjoy today here at NBK Capital. I think the culture is important. But again, I think making sure communication is clear, making sure people understand their role in the organization, incentivization, all these things are very important to put together. In a startup, it's tougher, obviously, because the cash is not there. So you talk about, equity, you talk about deferred payment plans. You have to make them buy into the concept as step one, but you also have to pay them for the risk they're taking in their career, and that's even more important in a startup situation than it is in a mature market.
True. Okay, so hiring is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So right now we're going to go to the other side of that sword, firing.
Yeah.
So in the startup community, we always say fire fast. So have you ever had to fire someone?
I have, and it's the most unpleasant, frankly, experience for me. But unfortunately, when you have shareholders and you're in a position where you need to hit your bottom line, sometimes you have to do it, right? And I think sometimes so you have two types of firing, right? You have firing because you're cost cutting, and then you have firing because that person is not performing or doesn't fit. And I think for the people that don't perform or don't fit, it's your responsibility to do what you need to do, because they could be with you for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, and if you're not giving them that feedback, قاعد تظلم حياتهم. So I think you need to give them that feedback early enough so they can recover, right? And inshallah find something else that they're more passionate about, perform better in, and move ahead. It's the other type of firing that I think is tougher, because it's not مو بيدك ولا بإيدهم هم.
That was a gem of an answer. When should an entrepreneur consider selling or bringing new investors? So a lot of entrepreneurs are either like innovators or they hold on to their business. So when do you think is a good time to exit from that business?
Yeah, I think it's a very tough situation. And sometimes it's too late. I mean, sometimes by the time the entrepreneur thinks they want to bring in an investor, they've burned through all their cash and they've really not done what they should be doing as a business. I think it's when the entrepreneur is ready to bring in someone, and again, let's go back to dumb money and smart money. If you're bringing in smart money, you need to be aware that the way you used to live on a daily basis in terms of decision makings is going to change. And if you're not comfortable with that, then it might be too early to bring in an investor. But sometimes you look at the market and you see your business model almost being replicated somewhere else. You have a first mover advantage. You need money to move ahead. And if you don't move ahead, you might grow 20% a year in Kuwait, but guess what? The guy that's growing 30% in Saudi is going to come in and eat your lunch. That's when you bring in an investor, because you want to, again, have a defensive posture that allows you to grow your business and sort of deal with competition.
So, and that also enables you to bolster your growth and secure your position in the market.
Absolutely. And look, I think, again, we come back to what is very important. It's cash flow, right? If you're getting to a point where your cash is running dry and your run rate is high and you're sort of trying to figure it out, that's the right time to bring in an investor, whether it's an angel or a VC or friends and family. But you have to do it before you run out of cash, because then it's too late.
All right, so the startup ecosystem in Kuwait is on the rise, with more and more people being introduced to what the startup is in this community every day. So what role will NBK Capital play in fostering and creating this ecosystem?
Sure. Look, at this stage, we'll play the PE role, right? So, we'll play the latter end of the pre-IPO situation. So let's talk about a business that's going public in 5 years.
All right.
That's where we currently play a role. Now, that doesn't mean, the other thing we do actually, so just to give you guys the other thing we do, so we invest in equity and we invest in something called mezzanine financing. Okay, so we also invest, i.e. finance. And mezzanine is really geared towards cash positive businesses that are asset light, where a bank doesn't feel comfortable giving you a loan and you don't have hard assets, right? So that's the other thing we do to kind of support that ecosystem. But I think the early stage of the ecosystem is where we're lagging in this region. I see that coming along, but I don't think we're there yet, and I don't see us being there say 5 to 10 years.
All right, so I'm going to ask you questions probably in everyone's mind. In your opinion, why wasn't Talabat, the largest, most mature startup in Kuwait, acquired by a regional VC or even a local, if any?
Sure. I mean, look, people talk to Talabat, right? And I think Hamad was smart enough to know when to sell and when not to sell. And frankly, the strategic that came to Talabat would pay a lot more for that business than a financial. So a financial investor like ourselves would value the business lower than a strategic. If you look at who bought Talabat, actually a guy was with me in business school, what they do is they essentially replicate business models, rocket internet, right? They replicate business models in emerging markets.
Yes.
They have, I think it's Delivery Hero, I'm not sure if it's Delivery Hero, but they have another business that's essentially like Talabat in another geography. So for them to buy Talabat is a no-brainer because they buy a geography. They have the same suppliers, but now they buy a client pool as well. So when you're traveling, eventually I think you'll see this with the app. When you're traveling, it's not just to be Kuwait, Saudi, Qatar. It'll be Kuwait, Saudi, Qatar, London, Hong Kong, wherever, right? So for them, they can pay the valuation they paid. For someone like us, talking to Talabat, we can't really offer that because we won't make that much money off of the investment. So I think there are two reasons. Sorry, it's a long answer.
It's okay, it's a heavy question.
There are two reasons. I think one is there aren't that many people out there that were comfortable with a non-asset-based business. Okay? But I think secondly, I think, again, I think Mohammed figured out that a strategic would probably make more sense than a financial investor. And strategics here, there aren't that many, right? He was competing with others, so it would have been tough.
True, because Mohammed's vision was probably to grow outside.
It was to grow. And you know, that business model is a lovely business model, but it's all about first mover advantage. It's all about getting there, signing up the restaurants and the clients before anyone else. You can try to dislodge that, but it's very tough. You need a lot of cash to burn. He realized that, and the Rocket Internet guys realized that as well. So they bought them out.
All right, so another question that's probably on the minds of everyone. As entrepreneurs, we're in a constant battle every day with bureaucracy in Kuwait. So how does the private sector deal with delays caused by the bureaucratic system in Kuwait?
It's a tough one. You have to deal with it, right? I think if we talk about things like Talabat, right? To go back to if you look at what's developed here, from again not a very deep understanding of what's going on in Kuwait. It's not my background, but you see business models that go away or try to yitfadon al-bureaucracy. So when you're going virtual, you're not dealing with as much of the bureaucracy as going brick and mortars, right? And I think that's what you're seeing now with the younger generations sort of building these business models that try to actually feed on the bureaucracy and say, you know, this is a solution to the bureaucracy. For us, we have to deal with what we have to deal with. That's part of the market. It also creates a barrier to entry, frankly. Yani, bureaucracy for a big player who knows how to get around bureaucracy is good. I'm not saying it's good overall, but for them, it helps them create a barrier to entry because they know how to deal with things that a smaller player wouldn't know how to deal with, which is not a good thing for the marketplace as a whole, but you see that happening in the private sector of the Kuwait. I hope, and I see some changes, I hope inshallah this will change moving forward. And you know, it's our collective responsibility to push to get these changes happening.
So basically, to overcome that barrier of entry, you have to have some sort of bureaucracy etiquette. Yeah,
any bureaucracy etiquette or yes, bureaucracy, a good way of putting it.
All right. So expansion and growth is one of the pillars of business strategy. And in your opinion, should entrepreneurs think to expand regionally or globally?
If you can do globally, great. If you can do globally, great. But don't dilute your focus. You know, if you've got a barrier, if you've got a competitive advantage in the region, and we tend to do here, right? Whether it's language or culture or understanding the bureaucracy or whatever the case is, you need to make sure you tackle those markets very quickly, right? I think if you think globally, it's great, but if you're going out and competing with people that are already there, that have a lot of resources behind them, that understand the market better than you, you're sort of taking away from the market that you could have created. Yani the one thing I kept, I tell people, frankly, who are serial entrepreneurs, right, who want to sell, who want to build and sell a business, is think about the sale, right? Think backwards. Who are you selling this to? What does the business have to look like? And then work backwards into making sure that your milestones are getting you there, right? And you don't have much time. If you want to go global, there really needs to be a very clear differentiation. If you don't have that differentiation, use that time to do regional.
All right, that sounds... Do you think there's a difference between the GCC and MENA market? Because we talked about regional and global, but
Yeah.
we can, if you go down a little bit, the GCC and MENA region are quite different.
Yeah, I think there are differences. I mean, you take it from purchasing power all the way to bureaucracy, frankly, and taxes. There's a lot of nuances to other models outside of the GCC. We sort of have a common market here. But again, you have the same demographics. So if you are a business where your payment portals are online and you don't have hard assets and you can expand quickly and it's all about marketing and you can look at these other markets. But if you have to go in and set up, I think there's a big difference between a place like Egypt or Morocco versus the Kuwait or Saudi. They might be better markets, but I think here you have more common characteristics.
Or we might have tapped into that question
Sure.
a bit later, but a bit before. But does NBK or NBK Capital really invest or finance small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, we do. So define small businesses.
Small businesses, as in companies like with a budget less than $1 million or less than 250,000. So something that has just come up into the market.
Yeah, tougher for a variety of reasons. So let me talk about, so from an NBK standpoint, they do sometimes, but it's tougher because banks tend to need collateral again,
Yes.
and that's sort of regulatory. There are some regulatory issues. For us, when you think about it, so let's take an example of a business or generally a business we would invest in or a fund that we have. You have a team of maybe 10 people chasing deals, right? The due diligence that you would do on a business that's turning over 250,000 KD or 1 million KD versus 100 million KD is not very different, by the way. Because you're doing legal due diligence. Okay, you might have more employees, but generally speaking, you're doing legal due diligence, you're doing commercial due diligence, you're bringing in consultants, you're paying a lot of money. So your transaction cost could be almost as much as your investment, plus the opportunity cost of actually having the team working on those deals. So it becomes tougher. When you look at VC funds outside, there's a deep pipeline of investments. So they do a lot of investments in a fund. And we're not there yet. So once we start seeing a lot of viable investments coming to market, then we'll start looking at VC. But for now, what we do is private equity and mezzanine financing.
Okay, so you answered my other question. Does NBK Capital plan on starting a VC fund?
Yeah, we're always open to it. I mean, بالعكس, I would love to be able to be in a position where we plan on doing it. However, for us to do it, there has to be buy-in from the investors. لأن مو فلوسنا آخرتها. I think it's too early to give them that thesis and saying there's a market for us to go out and find deals. But I think inshallah it will happen as the ecosystem you talked about starts developing. I think it'll be something we dip into. And frankly, as NBK, we're a relatively conservative player versus others. So others might do it. We might wait a little bit longer before we enter into the game.
All right. So, in comparison to VC funds, what are your thoughts on the local angel investor scene?
I don't know enough about it. أكون صريح معك. I hear about it. I would love to learn more about it. I'm sure it's there. I think I think a story like Talabat will increase
those angel investors.
Yeah, because when you look at it, I think it was 4 or 5 owners in State. But if you look at it, every stage, let's assume, I think it was about 3 times. At every stage, people made 3 times their money. Plus or minus, don't quote me on the numbers. But basically, every person that invested in it made their money and got their return back. If you put 100,000 in, you got 300,000. It's different than putting 10 million in and getting 150 million. But you still made 3 times your money on average, let's say. So I think that's increased awareness, and I think it's given people hope that someone from the outside, أنا بالعكس ترى I think having someone from the outside buy Talabat was better for the market because it gave people the hope and the validity that if you do something well, you're not just looking at a Kuwaiti investor or a regional investor.
It's a global scene.
It's a global scene, and I think you can do very well, and I think we have people who will do very well, and will be able to do what Talabat did.
Inshallah, Allah يسمع منك. All right, so regarding the famous Kuwaiti SME Fund,
Yeah.
how much of an impact do you think it'll have in magnifying and fertilizing the Kuwaiti SME sector?
I think it'll have an impact, inshallah. Again, I don't know a lot of, I'm not an expert in that. But I think any source of additional source of funding, government support should add value to the ecosystem. But if you look at the progression of markets from a VC standpoint, it wasn't just the money, right? It's government support in the beginning a little bit, but it's more the educational organizations, right? So when you look at Silicon Valley, there's a reason Silicon Valley is where Silicon Valley is, right? Stanford has played a phenomenal role, Caltech, in developing that ecosystem. So when you want to go hire those people that you want to hire, they're there, they're attracted to that environment. So I think we need to also move towards creating a holistic ecosystem that also brings in graduates that these businesses can utilize and leverage, right? It's not just the money, it's also the human capital, which is even more important than, frankly, the capital that people will bring to the table.
So building upon what you just said, so to succeed in today's business world, it's a very harsh environment and a very competitive environment.
Yeah.
What would you say the most important skills that we should have as graduates or as people who are switching careers?
I think, perseverance, right? So being able to just really day in, day out, deal with challenges, have the patience to move ahead when you need to, or just wait when you need to. I think work ethic, saraha, to me is very important for a variety of reasons. I think if you don't put in the work, it's never really going to pay off. You might get lucky, and sometimes it does, but generally speaking, you see the most successful people put in a tremendous amount of work into their businesses. And I think just being sort of agile and nimble and thinking about how to deal with a roadblock is also important, especially on the VC side.
All right, so looking back on Faisal's career, name a few pieces of advice that you would give your past self.
Don't do finance. I'll do a food delivery app.
All right.
I think take more risks earlier. Take more risks earlier would probably be something. I think putting myself in more uncomfortable situations is also something else that I think adds value. And frankly, developing more of my network. And I think to this day, as much as we all try, I think I could do better in being out there and sort of developing a network and connecting people, right? So I think those three things would be the most important.
Okay, so speaking of advice, what is the worst business advice that you have ever received?
It's actually a situation where someone told me that I was looking at two separate situations, and their viewpoint was you go with the one with the higher salary. And this is early in my career, and frankly, I don't think that's the right way of viewing it. I think early in your career you should be investing in yourself. And had I gone there, I don't think I would have progressed or been challenged or been working with people that helped me develop myself more. So that piece of advice of be short-term greedy, if you want to call it, in my view is again, there's a lot of examples where people get lucky and it happens, right? But generally speaking, I believe in being long-term greedy and not short-term greedy, especially early in, because you develop yourself a lot more.
You're basically having some sort of foresight.
Sorry?
Having some sort of foresight, looking into the future somehow.
Just sort of saying to yourself, look, I've done 4 years of university, I can do another 4 years in a phenomenal firm, or I can do 4 years working with someone in a startup that's very smart that I learned from. Then you'll get to a point where I think you will be very successful, but you have to have the building blocks to get there. You can't get there from day one.
That's true. All right, so as a final question from my side, what are the 3 core values that you've stuck to throughout your career that grounded and cemented your success?
I think being ethical, frankly, being honest with people and just being ethical. I think that's something that I hold very dear to my heart. Working as much as is required, and being patient. Although that's something that I've gotten to learn recently. So just not being too hasty in either decisions or dealing with people or moving in certain directions. You have to have the patience to just, again, take a step back sometimes.
And that is a true virtue. It's like the cliche. Patience is a virtue. Yeah.
We use a lot of cliche today.
Yeah. All right, so now I'm going to open up the opportunities for questions from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum. I just have two questions. First off, you began by talking about the importance of a human capital. While I was reading your CV, I found out you got your MBA in Harvard, and I want to know how you got accepted over there. Was it some kind of a connection, or was your GPA in your bachelor's? And my second question, and some people would say in NBK is like it's haram, or riba, or chidi, and how would you reply to that?
Sure. So second question, I won't reply because it's everyone's viewpoint. And everyone has their own viewpoint. First question, no, it wasn't wasta. Like I was saying earlier, I was a history undergrad. Went to the University of Chicago. Enjoyed it a lot, but wanted to fill the background that I didn't understand in finance. So I did my MBA, right? So بجاوب على سؤالك الحين. I worked for literally a year and a half to make sure my GMAT scores were good. And this is working, from like 7 to 9 p.m. And the first time I took the GMAT, terrible. Second time it got better. And that was really a lot of work for me to make sure that the scores were good enough to apply. And like I was saying earlier, I worked with mentors to understand what the application process meant and how to do it. And it took me a good 6 to 9 months after I got the GMAT situation sorted to apply. And I spent a lot of time on the essays. I actually did maybe 15 versions of each essay. I had great people helping me with the application process. So I think anyone can apply and anyone can get into a school like Harvard or Stanford or LBS or any good school if they put their mind to it. Another cliche, sorry, but you need to put the work behind it.
I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but as far as I know, VCs are trying to avoid the risks involved with startup investments. And isn't the fund, the SMEs over here, supposed to mitigate that? Because I think the government's guaranteeing 70% of the loan these businesses will be getting.
Yeah.
So with the mitigation of that risk, shouldn't they be investing in these startups? Because
it'll be easier to invest in the startups. Whether you should or shouldn't is a different question as well, right? I mean, it also depends on the business models, right? I honestly think if there's a phenomenal business model, you'll find an investor. I think you can talk to angels. I think you can talk to people that can connect you with people, and you'll find an investor.
But in terms of the institutional investors, like the banks, for example,
Okay,
typically are not in this field.
Okay, so I differentiate between VCs and private equity shops, right? So VCs to me are early stage. The banks, by default, won't invest in early stage investments because banks have to have capital. Banks are lenders by default, right? And now with the regulatory environment, it doesn't make much sense to do prop investments, period. If banks won't do it, private equity funds raise money based on an investment strategy that has to be proven. So your first fund is the toughest, but once you do fund 2 and 3, people go back and say, you've diverted from this strategy, so we won't put money with you in fund 4. So you have to, so basically you're stuck, right? It's a 10-year fund. Setting up new VC funds, I think will come, but I think the legal framework in the environment that we're in also needs to develop. So I think اليوم مع قوانين الكويت تغيرت شوية. You can have a single person company, right? There are SPVs that you can create. Bankruptcy laws potentially are getting there. You can, basically the regulations haven't reached to the point where VC funds from outside would look at investing in a pure startup here.
But in terms of the fund, as far as my understanding goes, that it guarantees the banks up to 70% of what they give out to the SMEs.
I think the banks will do it, but that's a loan, right? So I think that they'll finance. So again, maybe I'm being nuanced. They'll finance. I think they will, but I don't think they won't invest.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? They give you financing, but they won't invest. Financing akhirati, you have to pay them.
Exactly.
And that's where the guarantee comes in.
Oh, thank you.
My question is about inward foreign direct investment in Kuwait. How do you evaluate inward foreign direct investment in Kuwait and compared to other GCC countries? What is the reason behind Kuwait in the past was a leader in inward foreign direct investment, and we can see more investments going to Saudi Arabia and Dubai and UAE more than Kuwait?
Sure.
What the reasons at what the solutions in order to increase that in Kuwait?
Sure. Look, ultimately it comes back to investment opportunities. People are not going to put money unless they feel like they're going to make money. I think places like Dubai, the Emirates, went through a development phase later than we did. And attracted more money into those markets, partially because of that, not fully because of that. But they've also created an environment where investing is easier as a foreigner. And I think we're moving towards that in Kuwait, and there's been some changes today in Kuwait, and you have, again, the first fully foreign-owned company, which IBM did recently, about 3 months ago. And then you have the second one coming in, I think it's Huawei. What you also have is you have this year is a banner year for Kuwait in terms of money coming in or contract work being done because of all the infrastructure projects that are happening in Qita al-Nafti, and inshallah بالمطار soon enough. I think لازم تهيئ البيئة. The environment has to be interesting, and the business activity has to be there for that to happen. Saudi is a huge market. I mean, Saudi has so much opportunity. To give you an example, we invested in a business with Saudi that's معجنات. They had 50, I want to say 50 stores. They're now going on 82, and we haven't even touched the tertiary markets. It's only the primary markets of Saudi. You can't really compete with that, bil Kuwait. You'll never compete with those numbers, bil Kuwait. But I think we are improving, and I think we will see some more money coming in. I think the regulations are changing a little bit.
Before I ask my question, I have a comment for Faisal. You said that you don't take a lot of risks. I think majoring in history is a risk.
Sure.
I admire your courage in following your passion as opposed to studying something practical.
By the way, I was studying Middle Eastern history because I was trying to understand where the risks were. To avoid them. But,
yeah. Well, anyway, my question is regarding entrepreneurship in this region. When an entrepreneur is in a situation where their business model is not replicated anywhere, so they have the first mover advantage, and then suddenly competitors start springing up, do you think it makes sense for them to partner with these competitors, or should partnerships always be strategic?
No, I think in some cases you need to partner just from a defensive, from just defending your own market, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's rare that you get to that point. And this is going back to creating a business model where you are able to basically, expand and defend yourself versus your competitors. Because I assume you're the first person doing it,
Yeah.
and then people come in, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think if you're able to do it by yourself, by either bringing in investors and building out and taking away market share from them, I think that's a better way of doing it. If they have something that you don't, and it's really going to impact your business, I think partnering up or merging might be a good option. But theoretically, I can't talk about it. I don't know what the actual case is.
Yeah. Even at a startup level?
It's tough at a startup level, صراحة, because how do you value the business, right? How do you value their contribution versus your contribution? But if it's the only way to survive, you have to do what you have to do. But you might create a system where the valuation shifts with time, depending on whether you guys are merging or you're doing something that's different from what they're doing, but complementary. It shifts based on milestones. You move from 50-50 to 70-30. Depends. I don't know. صراحة. It's a tough question.
Right.
That's why I don't invest in startups.
All right then. Thank you very much, and I'd like to especially thank our sponsors, Asnan Tower and NBK, for making this happen. And I'd like to thank everyone here for attending. And now is going to be the best part of the event, the networking session. So thank you very much.